We used to be a lore channel, but then Riot stomped the brakes and League's lore has not moved forward in years. And so in a world where the last living piece of lore was Arcane, and the upcoming lore might only really kick off with the Riot MMO, if it kicks off, what do? We wonder why the heck did Sion look like that? And what even is Nasus when the Sun Disk wasn't even a thing? A hilarious being, let me tell you. Because yes, even though Classic may seem like a chaos of things that the devs thought of back in the day, in reality, there was lore behind the chaos. I mean, many people will remember how the old lore was focusing on the summoners, which were godlike mages that were capable of summoning beings from across the cosmos to fight in an arena. Also, those summoners happen to be the players. With the idea being that instead of dealing with countless wars, Runeterra built the Institute of War, which is where every nation could throw in their champion to represent them in the League of Legends. Which is where we had the battles on the Fields of Justice, and the winner of that battle would win whatever dispute was currently happening. So yes, instead of Noxus fighting Demacia, both sides would throw in a champion into League of Legends, and whoever won, won. That is what League of Legends was. It was an assortment of champions representing different nations. And they all joined for various reasons. Some of them were criminals, and so they were forced to fight. Others had nothing to do with anything that was happening, but they were forced to fight. And some joined willingly, because they wanted to fight for their nation. Anyway, even though League of Legends was a thing in this world, there were still smaller skirmishes happening between the nations, and so battles were still happening. And during those smaller skirmishes, we get some of the more interesting lore. And so today, we are diving into some of the weirdest and funniest pieces of lore that come from the Classic era of the champions that are playable in Classic right now. Starting with the one we already mentioned, Sion. Prior to the creation of League of Legends, the city-states of Demacia and Noxus were locked in brutal series of on-again and off-again wars that spanned across centuries. Both powers sought an advantage over the other, but Noxus was the city-state willing to forego conventional morality to achieve its goals. Only brute strength and the will to use it mattered to Noxus. And this is best exemplified in the murderous warrior, Sion. Used by the Noxians as a human battering ram, Sion would be sent thundering ahead of the Noxian troops. He would mercilessly slaughter foes with his large double-bladed axe, Chopper. Yes, while he was still a living human, Sion willingly named his axe Chopper. His complete disregardment for caution ultimately cost him his life, as he was captured and summarily executed by Demacian forces. Demacians thought that the beheading of Sion would be the end of his bloodthirsty ways. Death, however, was merely the beginning of Sion's rise to power. The famed Noxian assassin Katarina recovered Sion's remains, and Noxian necromancers reanimated the behemoth to serve Noxus once again. Sion's reanimation actually bestowed new powers on him and increased the potency of his existing abilities, making him even more of a terror to behold on the battlefield. Now notice how it is mentioning how it enhances his abilities. But the gaze stun is kinda never explained, nor is the shield. Or any other undead power, really. The Noxian High Command had powerful new weapon in their hands, one they have brought to bear as a champion in the League of Legends. Even though Sion's increased powers would make him a powerful tool for the High Command's use outside of the Fields of Justice, Noxus no longer risks losing one of their greatest champions in the League to chance or circumstance. Sion's days as a frontline fighter for Noxus's military conquests are at an end. So, long story short, Sion was a wild maniac that chopped heads with his chopper left and right, until he was actually killed by the Demacians. Then Katarina brought his remains back to Noxus. How did she do that, I really wonder. Sion was supposed to be a big brute, but alas, he was reanimated as an undead warrior. None of his abilities were explained after that, but it was mentioned that Noxians used him in the League of Legends because they didn't want to lose other soldiers. And so they just used an undead pawn to kinda soak the damage and potentially win from time to time. Which means, in other words, Sion was a placeholder. The real champion would arrive later. But yes, at least partially we now know why Sion looks the way he does. Or why he did look like that. Demacians killed him and he was reanimated. But that moves us onto another human being that also, surprisingly, has a slightly different lore than you remember. And that is Gangplank. Gangplank was born the son of the dread pirate captain Vincent the Shadow, one of the most wealthy and feared pirates in all of the Blue Flame Island. One might think this would have spoiled the boy with a cushioned life of privilege, but the truth is quite the opposite. Growing up in the city of Bilgewater isn't easy. Pirates are not known for their compassion, and that most certainly extends to the families. Vincent wanted his son to grow up tough and strong, so he was extremely hard on the young Gangplank. Even as a child, Gangplank was as mean as a snake, and it is said that he has slept with his eyes open. As he grew, the young man rapidly became the most ruthless and feared pirate in all of Bilgewater, and his daddy was never more proud on the day of his son's 18th birthday, when Gangplank stabbed the old man in the back and claimed the famed pirate ship the Deadpool for his own. The continent of Valoran, however, is a dangerous place for pirates. Gangplank could read the writing on the wall. He was a pirate that could read. That's weird. The den of pirates known as Bilgewater would soon be pulled down by the undertow of Valoran politics and the Institute of War. It was time for Bilgewater to have their own champion to represent them in the League of Legends. And who better than the fiercest pirate of them all? It is said that Gangplank has enough power and favor to claim the title of the Pirate King back home, but that he is simply biding his time and building his reputation as a champion before he returns to the life of piracy. So yes, Gangplank's story is very weird. You see, it started as a classic pirate story where he was brought up as a pirate, he backstabbed his own father to claim his ship, and then he thought, hey, politics are happening, I should join the politics because I am now a pirate of high rank, and then I'm going back to piracy. So yes, in other words, for a time, Gangplank technically became a politician. Yes, that is a man of high knowledge. And speaking of people of high knowledge, of course, we all know Nasus as the librarian. But that is in the modern lore where Shurima exists, and they have libraries, and there is an empire. But back in the day, none of that existed. We didn't even have a sun disk that would turn a human being into an ascended. So what the heck is Nasus? An enigmatic creature known as Nasus came to the League from a faraway world and served as a part of a vast and learned desert empire. Here, when they talk about a distant world, they actually mean a different world. Yes, the old League lore was a galactic lore, which means different champions were technically aliens. And so Nasus was an alien. There he was respected and enlightened individual, having been made the keeper of the great library. However, he was also part of a race of animalistic creatures that served as the rulers and protectors of the people. War was never more than a breath away, as others of his kind craved to enslave the people and claim totalitarian sovereignty. In the midst of a heated battle, just as Nasus was about to slay his treacherous brother Renekton, he was summoned to Runeterra. It didn't take much to convince him that champions were needed to fight against the injustice here, and he took up a place in the League of Legends. These days he is the Keeper of the Sands, feeling most at home in the crumbling ruins of the Shurima Desert. So yes, Nasus was an alien from a different planet. He was fighting a war against his brother Renekton until the summoners ripped him from across the cosmos and put him onto Runeterra. Yes, again, the summoners were quite powerful, which is why the old lore was scrapped. You couldn't even have a greater evil in the world without the summoners dealing with it all the time. Anyway, funnily enough, after Nasus appeared on Runeterra, he looked at the war that was happening here and he said, yep, sure, I'll help you, I'll fight. And that's his lore. He was literally fine with fighting for whoever needed him because there was war and he didn't like it. No sadness that he wasn't part of his home anymore. He made a new home in Shurima because it reminded him of his planet. And that's it. What the heck was happening in the old lore? Speaking of which, there are more champions with a similar theme. For example, there is Malphite. There is a world of perfect harmony, where all are part of the whole. The monolith is the essence of all, and its denizens are but singular piece of the whole. Malphite was always strived to live up to his full potential, as his own personal part of the whole. A distinguished creature questioning to enforce the flawless vision of order. Then one day the dimensional rift opened and he was summoned across the cosmos to the world of Runeterra. At first outraged to be taken from the monolith, Malphite quickly learned of this world's disharmony. There were those who sought to bring order out of chaos, and it's they that summoned the rock creature to aim them in this quest. It was a goal that Malphite could respect, and one in which he could partake. Today, he hammers those who seek to upset Valorant's movement towards order, especially those that wield chaotic magic. So yes, Malphite too was an alien. He was part of a planet that was part of a whole called the Monolith. He was kind of feeling iffy about the Monolith part, and then he was summoned away by the Summoners because they are godly beings. He was placed onto Runeterra, and there Malphite realized, hey, these guys don't know harmony, let me teach them. Also, you'll see a lot of references to the order and chaos in this old lore. This is actually what the two sides of the Summoner's Rift used to be. One was order, the other one was chaos. And Malphite really wanted to be on the order side. But speaking of a rocky being that's all about stones, there is one more champion with a similar theme that is surprisingly weirdly close to what just happened. And of course, we're talking about Taric. There is an ancient form of magic, forgotten by many and discarded by some. It is the magic of the earth, of resonance, of crystals and gems. Taric's father was a healer in their city, on a world far away. That's right, Taric too was an alien. Taric was always interested in his father's pursuits, even from a young age. Despite his burgeoning understanding of herbs, plants, and animal medicines, it was the power of gems that most fascinated the growing boy. It wasn't long before Taric had exhausted his father's Covenant library and set out on a path of his own. He wasn't to be a healer, but a defender. One who used the power of the earth to preserve and protect. Quickly, Taric became a wandering knight, renowned across the land. That is, until the day a spell of summoning grabbed him from his home and deposited him on Runeterra. Now Taric missed his world, though he is happy to fight in the League, protecting all who are in need. So yes, Taric was an alien that was studying gems on a different planet. He was summoned onto Runeterra by the Summoners. He was sad that he was taken away from his home world, but he was happy that he could fight. That's the point of his lore. That's quite literally what was written there. The old lore was wild. But if there is one champion that actually pays the most attention to what's really happening with the Summoners, it is Pantheon. And so get ready for hilarious lore. Far above the clouds of Mount Gargantuan. Yes, that is actually what Mount Targon used to be called. There resides a stalwart tribe of people known as the Stanpar, who still revere combat and war as ultimate art forms. They remember the rune wars of Runeterra, and know that the League of Legends can only repress the rising tides of violence for so long. Each member of the tribe is bred to be disciplined and vicious warrior, preferring to battle either the Noxian or the Massian armies only when outnumbered at least 10 to 1. Stanpar warriors are trained not only to be lethal with their bare hands, as the most capable martial artists, but also to fiercely wield the many relic weapons of the tribe. Such treasures have been handed down from generation to generation, and have harnessed the mystical nature of Runeterra in their very cores. These relic weapons are among the most dangerous in existence. And it comes as no surprise that they have found their way to the League of Legends in the hands of Pantheon. The stone-faced warrior is a paragon of his people, his very existence an anthem to exaltation to the art of combat. Pantheon found it insulting that the people of Valoran would install an organization to replace war, complete with so-called champions, without including the Stanpar, gathering the blessings of his tribe and armed with the relics of his ancestors. He has descended on the League to show the world a true warrior. He cares not who he fights. He cares nothing for the pageantry or prestige of a League champion, but lives only for the austere glory of battle. As long as Pantheon breathes, he thirsts for another foe to vanquish. So yes, Pantheon's lore is actually funny. Because yes, the funny names apart, because Stanpar is not a thing and Mount Gargantuan was quite a funny name. The lore tries to explain his supernatural powers with throwing a spear and it then teleporting back to his hand, as well as jumping into the sky and dropping somewhere. All of those should be part of the ancestral weapons, which is a spear with exactly 5 polygons. But funnily enough, the reason why Pantheon fought in the League of Legends is why players play League of Legends now. He didn't care for glory, he didn't care for honor, he didn't care for justice. He honestly didn't care who would win. He simply fought on the fields of justice because he hated League of Legends. And isn't that lore that was written 15 years ago a perfect mirror of today?